Have you ever really stopped to think about it? If an infinite God wanted to get a message to us here on this tiny planet, how would he even do it? It's a huge question, and it's actually the start of an incredible story. A story about how God reveals himself not just in some old book, but right in the middle of human history. So let's jump in.
So, let's start right there with that big question. Seriously, if an all-powerful God wanted to make himself known, what would that even look like? A booming voice from the sky? A message written in the stars? Or maybe something completely different? This one question is really the key to everything we're going to talk about.
All right, so the story starts in the most obvious place you can imagine, the world all around us. You know, long before anyone wrote anything down, people had this sense that the divine was, well, everywhere, in the very fabric of reality.
For ancient people, the world wasn't just a bunch of rocks and trees and water. As the great historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, pointed out, nature was never just natural. The whole cosmos felt alive, like it was buzzing with a sacred energy. It was like a window to something bigger than itself. I mean, just think about it for a second. The sky, it's vast, it's untouchable. It just naturally makes you think of something transcendent, a most high. And the earth, with its cycles of planting and harvesting, it felt like a mother, you know? Something that nourishes and sustains you. And water? Wow, water was everything. It was the source of life, but it could also mean chaos, death, and then rebirth. For our earliest ancestors, the supernatural was literally shining right through the natural world. And this idea, this cosmic revelation, is summed up perfectly right here by the Apostle Paul. He's saying that the sheer order and beauty of the world, all the things he has made, are like divine fingerprints left all over the place. They point back to an invisible creator. This is really the first universal chapter in this whole story of God's revelation.
But then, the story takes this completely radical turn. We go from this universal feeling of God and the cycles of nature to a totally groundbreaking idea. A God who doesn't just exist in the background, but who actually steps into the messy, one-way street of human history.
So this is the crucial shift right here. It's about how we see time itself. See, most ancient religions thought time was a big circle, an eternal loop. The seasons repeat, the rituals repeat, and it all just comes back around again. But ancient Judaism introduced this world-changing idea that time is a line. It has a beginning, it's heading somewhere specific, and every single moment is unique. History isn't a circle, it's a story with a plot.
And there's a name for this. It's called salvation history. It's this core belief that history isn't just a series of random accidents. No, it's the actual stage where a divine story of rescue is playing out. God isn't some distant clockmaker, he's a main character in the story, actively guiding things toward a final, saving purpose. And you can see this story unfolding step by step in the Old Testament. It starts small, with a personal promise, a covenant with one man, Abraham, to create a people. Then it gets bigger. Through Moses and the Exodus, God shows a whole new side of his character. He's a liberator, a God who frees slaves and gives a path to follow. And then, through the prophets, God starts speaking directly, calling his people back to him. Each step reveals a little more of who God is and what he's up to.
But here's the thing. This whole sprawling, centuries-long story, from Abraham to Moses to the last of the prophets, it was all building towards something. It was all a prelude, setting the stage for one single pivotal moment in time.
And that pivotal moment is right here. This is where the story shifts from a slow, gradual reveal to something definite and explosive. Because in the Christian view, God's self-revelation stops being indirect and becomes radically, unbelievably personal. This one sentence from the Gospel of John is the absolute heart of the whole thing. The Word, which means the logic, the reason, the very self-expression of God, became a human being. Just let that sink in for a second. The revelation isn't just through a burning bush or through a prophet's message anymore. Now the revelation is a person you could see and touch walking around in history.
So how exactly did Jesus reveal God? Well, it happened in a few huge ways. First, his teachings totally flipped the script on what people thought God was like. He talked about God as Abba, an intimate, loving father. Then he started doing things that only God was supposed to be able to do, like forgiving sins on his own authority. That was shocking. Then he makes this unbelievable claim, telling his followers, point blank, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And finally, the resurrection. That was presented as the ultimate proof, the final word, God's power over death itself, which in turn validated everything else he had ever said or done.
But hang on, because the story doesn't just end there. You might think, okay, Jesus ascends to heaven, credits roll. But that's not what happens. Instead, the revelation transforms, becoming this active, ongoing presence in the world today.
Yeah, the revelation keeps going through the work of the Holy Spirit. I love this idea of it being like a fountain. The life of Jesus is the source, right? But the water, that living presence of God, it keeps flowing outward, carrying the story into right now for you and for me.
And check this out, because a single Greek word here tells us so much. Jesus calls the Holy Spirit the Parakletos, a helper, an advocate. But he calls him another comforter, using the word allos, which means another of the exact same kind. He didn't use the word heteros, which would mean another of a totally different kind. The message is powerful. The Spirit isn't a vague force, it's a personal presence, just like Jesus was.
And this personal presence has a job. It all kicks off at Pentecost, where the Spirit empowers the very first followers of Jesus. And from that moment on, the Spirit's role is to guide people, to help transform them, and, this is the key part, to take the historical story of Jesus and make it a living, breathing, personal reality for anyone, anywhere, at any time.
So, we've gone on this massive journey, right? From the cosmos to linear history to a person to a continuing presence. Which brings us to the most important question of all. What in the world does this giant story have to do with you?
And let's just be honest for a minute. For a lot of people, even people who believe, God can feel pretty far away sometimes. This quote hits on a deep truth. That feeling of divine silence, of God hiding, is a very real thing. The story of Revelation isn't always bright and clear.
And maybe that's the whole kwai. The entire sweep of this story seems to suggest that God's revelation was never meant to be some kind of cosmic, mathematical proof that forces you to believe. Instead, it's presented more like a relationship unfolding, a personal invitation that's offered through creation, through history, and through a person. It's an invitation to step in and be a part of the story.
So, there it is. We've gone from the echo of God in a sunset all the way to a person in history and a story that's still fountaining out into the world today. The grand narrative has been told. And now, the only question left is the one this history asks of every single one of us.